everybody. Thank you for coming out to the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice tonight. It's a rainy night, but it's a well-needed conversation we're having here tonight. Joining us is Ms. Andrea Serrano from OLE and Mr. Tim Davis from the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, and they will be discussing the ordinance on paid sick leave here. It's on the ballot for this voting cycle that ends October 3rd. If you could please tell us a little about the ordinance and maybe tell us how this initiative started and what motivated you to start.
Yeah, so in spring of 2015, so OLE is a member-based organization, and so for 5 weeks, every Tuesday for 5 weeks, our members actually turned out to OLE and we did lots of brainstorming around what are the needs of workers and what are the needs of working families. And from that was the Fair Work Week campaign, which included paid sick leave. And Fair Work Week was everything from, advance notice of scheduling to, having time, the right to rest in between shifts. I didn't realize this was a thing, which speaks to my privilege as a worker. That there are employees, get out of work at 1, 2 in the morning and then have to come back to work at 6 to open. That's called clopenings, so closing and then opening. So this Fair Work Week ordinance would have put an end to clopenings. Unfortunately, City Councilor Ken Sanchez called for a fiscal impact study which halted any movement on Fair Work Week. And so the sponsors of the ordinance actually pulled it. So, and we were fine with that because we just felt like, okay, let's work on getting more public support. Let's work on really educating the public. And so when it came to 2016 and sitting down with our members and asking what's the most important aspect of all of this, the most important aspect for them was paid sick leave. Like above everything else, paid sick leave was what they wanted to work on. And so the attorneys from New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty worked on crafting the actual language of the ordinance based on what our members were saying. And I think that's been, we sort of laugh about it, but it isn't actually very funny that the opposition to this has kept saying, like, this was written in the dark, behind closed doors, by New York lawyers. And it's like, Tim's from, where are you from? Alabama? Tim's from Alabama, but he lives in New Mexico now. And he works for an organization that represents the interests of New Mexicans. And it was written by our members who are also living here in New Mexico. And so, we also gathered 24,000 signatures to get on the ballot. That means we had 24,000 unique conversations with people living in this city and answered lots of questions about this ordinance. And so we qualified for the ballot in 2016. The county commission kept us off the ballot, unfortunately. And so by law, we're on the 2017 ballot, and here we are, a few days out. We're sprinting toward the finish line.
Sure, and I can just briefly go through the nuts and bolts of the law itself. What will it do?
Yes, please do.
So it provides a right to earned sick leave for every worker in Albuquerque at a rate of 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. And that includes whether you're part-time or full-time. But there's a couple of really big limitations on what you can do with that earned sick leave. First is you can't use it until you've worked for your employer for 90 days. So after you've worked for about 3 months, then you can take some of the sick leave for legitimate reasons, right? You have to be sick or you have to be caring for a family member that's sick, or if you are a survivor of domestic violence, you can take your sick leave to receive services related to your domestic violence situation. And sexual assault and stalking as well. Thanks, Andrea. And the other big limitation is, depending upon if you work for a large or a small employer, you're capped at the number of days that you can take. So if you work for a small employer, and that's an employer that has fewer than 40 employees, you can only take 5 a year, 5 days a year, 40 hours. If you work for a large employer, That's an employer that has 40 or more employees. You can take 7 days a year. So it doesn't cap accrual, but it does cap usage.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, does this apply just to Albuquerque or to Bernalillo County or the state of New Mexico?
So that's a good question. It only applies to Albuquerque, and to get into the specifics of that, it applies to employees that work for employers, and these are defined terms in the Act. So an employer is someone who has to get a business license from the city of Albuquerque. And an employee is someone who works for that business at least 56 hours in a year. So you have to work at least 7 days a year to be considered an employee who gets this benefit.
So a local Burger King has to get
A local Burger King
Okay.
does. Let me give you an example of someone who does not have to get a business license from the city of Albuquerque. Someone who hires a babysitter. Someone who hires someone to landscape their yard. If that person works for a landscaping company, the landscaping company would have to get a business license. But if you just hire your neighbor's teenage child to mow your grass, you don't have to get a business license because you're not hiring someone, and you're not hiring someone because you're involved in that business for profit, right? The other important caveat here is that there are nonprofits that have to be covered even if they don't have to get a business license from Albuquerque. A lot of our healthcare providers are nonprofits, and it's really important that the people who are trying to make sure that you get better when you're sick are not sick and passing an illness on to you, so they're also covered.
One of the things to keep in mind also is that a lot of the people who don't have earned sick days right now work in the food industry and early education centers, some grocery stores, elder care facilities, and so, but also those who are most affected by this. There's 107,000 workers in Albuquerque who don't have earned paid sick leave. And I think, one of the things to keep in mind is that that the sick leave isn't given up front. It's earned, it's accrued, and it's at an hour, a rate of 1 hour per every 30 hours, which is reasonable. I think most people can agree that's a reasonable accrual rate. And Joni, I'm sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, so you said you don't have to use it it's not for people who hire like a babysitter or a kid to mow their lawn. But if someone hires like a nanny and has to pay like the nanny tax, or hires someone to care for an elder on a kind of a long-term basis?
Sure, unless you are hiring someone to provide elder care and you're in the business of hiring people to provide elder care for profit, then you don't have to get a business license in Albuquerque. So if I had a family member that needed health care at home and I hired someone to do that, just personally, I'm not in the business of profiting off that labor, so I don't have to get a business license to hire that person to take care of a sick family member.
So you're not contracting. Anybody contracting somebody doesn't have to pay it. It has to be an established business for profit that has to the ordinance only affects those kind of businesses.
Correct. Or nonprofits with a physical premises in Albuquerque.
Somebody getting paid to do their job. So you paying. You're asking for a service. That's the difference. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in?
Has there been any polling, what's the sense of whether it's going to pass or not?
So a journal poll that came out recently showed us with about 53% support among journal readers who are voters. We have canvassers out every evening who are all over the city who are having conversations, and we're hearing we see lots and lots of support. Where we see the least support is District 8, which is covered by City Councilor Trudy Jones, who is vocally against earned sick days. that also, right now, with early voting, that's the district that's turned out the most voters so far. So that's the Northeast Heights, right? So Trudy Jones vocally against earned sick days. Her district is where we've seen the lowest amount of support. Her district is who's voting right now. So part of the message that we actually need for folks to get out is how important voting is, and that the ordinance is on the back of the ballot. So on one side of the ballot, you vote for mayor, you vote for city council, you vote for the bond questions, and then you flip the ballot over, and that's where you can vote for the proposed ordinance for earned sick days. And, mayoral races have had really low turnout. So part of what's really important to us is making sure that we have a really high turnout, and that, the people the electorate is representative of the city. Thus far, in the last few races, the electorate that's turned out isn't representative of our city's population, and that's problematic, right? So this isn't just about earned sick days. This is also about how are we engaging people. Having a 2-year campaign has really given us an opportunity to have lots and lots of conversations on the doors, and to build a base of people who really support this. And it isn't just workers who support this, it's business owners who support this ordinance, but it's also people who already have sick leave. I have sick leave, right? Tim has sick leave. Most of my family members have sick leave, and they're all supporting the earned sick days, not just because they're my family, they love me, but they also get it, that it's a good idea. And so we see a lot of support among people who already have sick leave, who understand the importance of having it.
The Democratic Party just came out and endorsed the ordinance. Who else, which other organizations in town support it?
AARP
Okay.
supports earned sick days, the Rape Crisis Center of Central New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, the New Mexico Coalition of Domestic Violence Programs, Enlace Comunitario supports this. The Albuquerque Peace and Justice Center, yay, supports this. There's so many organizations. Oh my goodness. The partners who are actually in the coalition, aside from Olay and the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, Strong Families New Mexico, the Center for Civic Policy, El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos, and SWAP have all been working in coalition on this, but also, our partners who are in support, Equality New Mexico has been a big supporter of this, and just like, I'm going to keep thinking about them, and I'll think about them later, and I'll say, oh, why didn't I say them?
Working Families, I think.
Thank you, New Mexico Working Families Party, of course. Also, something to keep in mind is that there are small businesses who have signed on as endorsers. So Nexus Brewery, Breve Coffee, Conchita's Cafe, Grassroots Yoga, Donut Mart, Lux Lash and Beauty Bar. I never can say that one right. Actually, the owner of Lux Lash and Beauty Bar, she's an Olay member and has been in this fight from the beginning, even before she owned her business. She has one employee. She offers that one employee paid sick leave. So, this is very much a campaign that's very near and dear to our hearts, but it's also rooted in our community.
Do you want to add? Yes, go ahead.
Just wanted to add one thing about these business supporters that we have. They're already doing the right thing, but I think it's really important to know that when this passes, they're not going to be put at a competitive disadvantage for doing the right thing. And that's really important. So it levels the playing field for businesses. And of course, it has benefits for workers who do not currently have paid sick, but also for all of us, because I don't want to get sick because someone couldn't stay home from work that day.
And on that, let me just add one more thing.
Sure.
So 1 in 4 foodborne illnesses are contracted from a sick food handler. So a server, a cook, prep cook, busser, like 1 in 4 foodborne illnesses, which the other day I was picking up some food and, the woman was hacking up and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, you're so sick. Please hope for earned sick days. Please don't cough on my food. So there's that piece of it. But also, I think, when people have full paychecks, they spend money. And, people are able to pay bills and buy food. People are able to get their kids haircuts. They're able to buy their kids shoes. They're able to replace a tire. They're able to you know, maybe go to a football game, you know, whatever it is. When people have full paychecks, they're able to, you know, fully provide, even if they're just making it. One day's wages can completely devastate a family's budget for a month or a couple of months. It can put a family behind for a couple of months, and that's a reality. That isn't like, you know, like we don't pull out these like novel ideas and put them into campaign. These are the realities that our members are facing, that our communities face. Albuquerque is very slow to recover from the 2008 recession, right? And we keep hearing from opposition, you know, oh, this is a job killer, this is going to kill business, this is, you know, it seems like they're only concerned about saving business when there's something that's good for workers and business. You know, the last time they were out here with this rhetoric was in 2012 with the minimum wage increase. Where were they for 5 years? Where were they worrying about small business for the last 5 years? You know, so Albuquerque's recession and Albuquerque's slow recovery is a result of taxes for out-of-state corporations, tax cuts rather for out-of-state corporations, and the burden being placed on small businesses. Yes. That's the burden. The workers aren't the burden. Sick leave is not the burden. And when you look at the people who oppose sick leave, support tax cuts for the wealthy, you know, then you have to ask, well, why are you so against this? The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that sick leave costs 33 cents an hour to provide sick leave. And so you gotta, you know, you start to wonder, well, why do they hate small business so much? And why do they hate Albuquerque so much? And it isn't that. It's that, you know, keeping workers, you know, from having any sort of benefit in their minds is how they keep growing, you know, basically their bank accounts.
You know, I'll get to you in 1 second. As a small business owner, I know how important it is to keep a healthy workforce. If you have a small number of employees, you develop relationships and you understand, and especially if they're good employees and have a good work ethic. And how do you build on that work ethic? You support them, and you support yourself by supporting an ordinance like this. I understand the importance of taking care of a family. You, in essence, have an extended family with employees. Mm-hmm. And that's a small business frame of mind. Big business, it affects big pocket. They're not in touch, so that's where we come in to protect employees. You have a number of 110,000 employees and employers that you listed on your paperwork. Can you tell me a little about where you got that from?
107,000 workers
okay.
who don't have paid sick leave.
Okay, you know, everybody's saying this is such an extreme ordinance. There's got to be other places in the states that have this. Can you talk about that, and how do we compare to different states?
So this ordinance is in no way extreme. It's largely based on the ordinance, or not even the state statute that's statewide in Arizona that recently passed. And I think most of us would agree that Arizona has a reputation for leaning pretty conservative. This ordinance is in the main line of all of those. We did write the ordinance, but we did largely base it on Arizona, as well as taking some pieces of law that already exist in the Albuquerque Code of Ordinances and inserting those in so everything fits. So if you look at the definition of employee, for instance, or employer, it's going to be the same as the Albuquerque Minimum Wage Ordinance. And again, it provides 5 days a year if you work for a small employer, or 7 if you work for a large employer. This is in no way extreme at all. One other thing I'd like to hit on is there has been a lot of talk about this rebuttable presumption provision. In some way has been construed by a lot of the opponents in a way that they think you can't fire your employees. That's absolutely wrong. The same provision exists in the Arizona paid sick law. It also exists in the Santa Fe living wage ordinance. So you've got a conservative state and a pretty liberal city that have the exact same provision in their laws. And this is a provision that you see pretty regularly in labor and employment laws. And what does it actually mean? It just means that you can't fire someone after they've taken paid sick leave and not give a reason. You can absolutely fire someone, right? You can fire someone for poor job performance. You can fire someone because they're abusing their sick leave. They're taking sick leave and you check their Facebook account and they're at Cliffs, or you check their Facebook account and they're partying, right? It just means that they have to give you a reason. And if that reason is something other than because you took sick leave, then there's no problem, right? You can't fire someone for a protected reason. The same reason you can't fire someone based on their race or their religious beliefs, right? This is just saying that paid sick leave is a protected right. That's all there is to it. So if they give a reason, then the burden is on the employee to prove that that was just a pretense. So you still have a burden. The worker still has to prove that they were fired for a discriminatory reason.
That's an important clause. Go ahead, Sue.
I'm really surprised that Arizona passed this statewide.
Yes.
Wow.
And an increase in their minimum wage.
Because they're so much more conservative than.
Well, and they also increased their minimum wage. And so the one of the groups who really worked at this is called Lucha. And they also were the organization that helped to defeat Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So, really looking at earned sick days, is a moral issue, it's an economic issue, it's a social justice issue, but it really also, it's common sense. It makes sense to let people get better. It's giving workers dignity to be able to stay home. When I was a kid and I'd have to stay home sick, and we had my grandma would stay with us. There's lots of families who don't have that, who don't have that. The grandma who can stay home with their kids. And so, we heard parents share heartbreaking stories of like giving their child Tylenol and sending them to school and hoping they would make it through the day because they couldn't afford to stay home with them. And, we're better than that in this city. We're better than that in this state. I always say we're a city of neighbors because
It's true.
we look out for each other. And that's what this vote is about, is being a city of neighbors who look out for each other. Did you have a question earlier, Joan?
Joan had something.
Yeah, how does this apply to tipped workers? So if someone is getting $2.20 an hour as a tipped worker, and they take time off, but they're dependent on their tips really for their income, do they only get $2.20?
So the tip wage is actually increased because of the minimum wage ordinance in 2012. So it's at 5.38, 68, 5 something.
Yeah, it's
Something.
close.
Yeah. So that's good, right? That's a really good thing. There's no way to make up for those tips that are lost when someone is sick, but making at least what they get in their hourly wage as part of their earned paid sick leave will at least cover, at least fill some of that gap. It won't fill the complete gap of what you make as tips. And when I was serving, and it was still the $2 or whatever, that's, tips are very important. They're still very important. But at least it's that 5 something that isn't being lost, even if the tips are being lost.
Overall, it protects employees. It does. And I really would like to take the conversation back into holding government accountable and helping out small business instead of putting the burden on small business and scapegoating employees. We should have tax cuts, incentives for small business that do this with the employees. You said something about the nonprofit that you work for, Joan, and you told us you offer more than the ordinance itself. Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah, we offer 1 hour for every 21 and a half hours worked. And
Oh, wow.
So we have a generous sick leave policy. We're a small,
What's the name of the nonprofit?
New Mexico Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, but we're a very small nonprofit, bare bones, small budget, but we believe in investing in our people.
Big heart.
That's where our power is in our people, and we cap the the amount that can be earned. Partly because, we have to be good stewards of our donors' money, but also because we want to make sure that people use their sick leave, their paid time off, so that they can work harder and better for us.
Did this have to do with your moral values? I mean, religion comes in, and every religion teaches us to take care of our sick.
Right.
And when it comes down to actually doing the work, well, we say, oh, some of the powers that be want to halt that and halt the doors of mercy. I mean, like, really close it up.
Well, and we know that in taking care of our employees, then they can take care of and follow the mandate of their faith to take care of the people who are coming to us for help. And we can't take care of them if we're not healthy. Mm-hmm. And so then we can't fulfill our mission.
Absolutely. Father Frank, what can you add to this?
Well, there sometimes mercy is just.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, all the time.
I was going to say that's all the time.
Yeah, mercy is just. But this last Sunday, the gospel reading was about the vine dresser who went out in the early morning and hired a few people to work in his vineyard, and then he went out around noon, hired some more, went out about 3 o'clock, hired some more, and went out and hired some just a couple hours before sundown. And when it came time to pay everybody at the end of the day, he paid everybody a day's wage, which I think speaks to this issue, because even though some people might have only worked a couple hours, they got a full day's wage, because that's what he agreed to, because of the need. And that's what we're talking about here. The need, the just needs being met by those who are able to do it. And of course, those who worked all day bitched and moaned about those who worked for 2 hours getting the same pay as they did. And the guy said, the vine dresser said, well, I can do with my money what I want. Why are you so jealous because I'm being generous to these people who've worked not as long as you? And usually the people who are at the end of the workday getting some work were probably people who were not as able to work the full day. And so it's the same principle as I don't know if you've seen this meme of the 3 kids trying to watch a baseball game, and then the tall kid has a box and he's standing on his box. The middle kid has a box and he's standing on his box and can almost see it, but not quite. And then the real little kid has a box and he can't see it at all. So they're equal, but is that just? So the big kid gives his box to the little kid, and to the real little kid, and he can see that. So that's kind of an illustration. Oh, ta-da! Here it is. But I mean, there's a difference between equality and justice sometimes, and sometimes we have to be just before we're equal.
Absolutely. When you talk about justice and workers, I remember in the Muslim community, it's mandated in teachings that you give the worker his due fare before the sweat on his forehead is dry. Mm. That's how much it's mandated. You make sure you take care. And of course, under that is you honor those employees. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about city council. What could city council do about this ordinance if it passes? Is it allowed to change anything? Is it what role does it play with the ordinance? How about that?
What the ordinance says is that the city council cannot amend the ordinance to take away any of the substantive protections. And
could you name those again?
Sure. They can't say that, well, instead of 5 days, it's going to be 3 days. They can take 3 days. Well, you're going to have to work 60 hours to earn one day. They can't take away the protections that are in the law. If they want to amend in some other way that doesn't deal with the substance, the substantive protections, the ordinance actually gives them the power to do that. And I'd just like to point out that if the city council had the power to amend the law, then the direct voter legislation provision is really meaningless, right? The voters have spoken. The voters have petitioned their government to put something on the ballot and then voted it in. And then the city council can amend those protections. It would really be meaningless. So there is a limited area in which amendments could happen by the city council, but they cannot amend the substantive protections.
Part of the reason why this is in the ordinance is because in 2012, after 68% of voters voted for raising the minimum wage, there were city councilors who were pondering the idea of actually repealing the will of 68% of voters. And so that actually, one is just disrespectful of voters, but two is not, it's expected. And so the way to protect workers, the way to protect voters and the will of voters, that's why we vote. That's why we vote on things. And someone loses and someone wins in the vote. That's how voting works. That's democracy. And if you don't like the outcome, I'm sorry, but that's how voting works. And so, to say, okay, we don't like this, and there's 9 of us, and we're going to change our minds, like that feels unfair. It is unfair. Something that the city council did in July. Something the city council did in July, City Councilor Brad Winter introduced an advisory question asking, should the city council work on sick leave? And it's just an advisory question. It has 0 teeth. Like it means nothing. It's like me asking Samia, should we have coffee?
Yes.
Okay, yes, we shall. But until we actually have coffee, it's just an advisory question. What it was meant to do was to confuse voters, because what was going to happen is the advisory question would have been on the front of the ballot. People would have voted yes, turned over the ballot and said, oh, there's the full ordinance of what I just voted for, but I just voted for it, so we're good, right? Every city councilor who was present at that meeting, with the exception of Diane Gibson, voted for it. Pat Davis was absent, so obviously he didn't vote. Diane Gibson voted no, but every other councilor who was there, Brad Winter, Dan Lewis, Don Harris, Ken Sanchez, Clarissa Pena, and Trudy Jones.
She voted for it?
They all voted in favor of this advisory question. A judge saw through it. Not only did he force them to remove it from the ballot, he ordered them to not put anything else on the ballot. And so thankfully, because of the brilliant work of the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, particularly Tim Davis and Elizabeth Wagner, we were able to take this question off the ballot. It really was an injustice to put it on there. It really was disrupting democracy, and is politically just cheating voters. And it, when we worked to get 24,000 signatures, it wasn't. We didn't work to get 24,000 signatures to then be able to have the council just say, well, we're going to put this question on. The Albuquerque Coalition for a Healthy Economy, AIC. So really, actually, it was NAOP, the New Mexico Restaurant Association, the New Mexico Association of Commerce and Industry sued, not only to get earned sick days off the ballot, but also to take minimum wage back to $7.50. So we spent a lot of time in court fighting to get on the ballot, to be the only question on the ballot, because we worked to get there. We followed every single rule. And it's having partners like the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty and our partners within the coalition, our community members, judges who were fair, and they didn't always rule in the way we wanted them to. But, that's why this election is so important. That's why we need people to go out and vote. That's why we need people to remember to turn over the ballot and vote for earned sick days. It isn't just about earned sick days. It's about responding to this idea that a very few elite rule this city and the rest of us are just supposed to take and accept whatever is handed to us. But in all reality, by voting and by voting for each other, taking care of each other, we're responding and proving that that isn't who we are. We haven't had the best few years, right? We haven't had the best few years in this city policy-wise and policymaker-wise. But I'm from here, I was born here, I was born at UNM Hospital when it was BCMC, when it was Bernalillo County Medical Center. You know, my sisters were all born here, my dad's from northern New Mexico, my mom's from the East Mountains. And when it comes right down to it, I know we're better than what these few business coalitions are trying to say we are. And so I think that's why, even if there's a small audience tonight, you all know thousands of people, like, we need these votes. So early voting ends Friday. Early voting is open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Election day, the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. You know, we had a 19% voter turnout in 2013. We need to beat that by leaps and bounds.
You know, it's the way you described it, and it comes to mind. My family's been here for over 40 years.
Right.
And we've lived in different parts of New Mexico. We know the community well. It is a very good community. And it seems like outside forces want pretty much slave labor. Because you see the states of Arizona, Texas, even Seattle, you had the pay raise in the minimum wage. They have these ordinances. It's a healthy workforce that regenerates income and business, like we said earlier. So New Mexicans have to be wise and vote. Get out to vote. You don't vote, you don't count, basically. And I hope they listen to you loud and clear. We need to be there at the front line. It's your money, it's your dollar, it's your grocery bill, it's every little bill you ever had. Go out and vote if you care about your pocket.
It's your immune system.
Have you, when speaking to the faith community, what is their response to?
You know, so there's lots of people in our coalition who have been speaking to different folks. You know, we've definitely met lots of support. We have not had an official sign-on letter for the faith community. I think at some point, there's only so much, right? There's like, our staff and our volunteers have worked incredibly hard. They're phone banking right now. So unfortunately, we don't have an official sign-on letter from the faith community, but I think that, you know, the individual conversations we have been really positive.
But I should follow up. There will be a form going out with
and there will
Miles.
be there will be a letter. You're right. I'm sorry.
There will be. We might be putting on a press conference. Many in the faith community have initially endorsed it, but there have been scare tactics where you just answered a lot of their questions, just minimal questions of wanting to know if what the cap is, and that was an important factor in their decisions. But you will see the religious community come out and support you. I just want to ask one thing to Joan. I mean, I want to bring back Joan's point of her giving her employees more time, or the requirements are less for the 21 hours. Does the ordinance affect her? Is she required to change it? Or maybe people who get more time off? Some people will say, will this affect them? And anyway, do we have to go less time? If you ever have that, you're lucky to have that problem, would that be an issue?
The ordinance does not require anyone to change their PTO policy as long as it meets or exceeds the ordinance. And so it sets a floor, not a ceiling. So I worked for an organization years ago that combined combined our sick and vacation into PTO. I think we got like 3 weeks a year, and that wouldn't have to change. The only way it changes is if an employer decides to go to the minimum. It doesn't require any sort of special paperwork. It doesn't require any special reporting.
No complications?
No complications unless people want to make them for themselves, right? So, that's a really big thing, is that employers do not have to change their PTO policy. my organization, we have our own sick leave policy that is different from the ordinance. It exceeds what the ordinance calls for. We don't have to change our policy. We have several employees that we have on payroll that we keep track of. We keep track of their time. We don't, it isn't gonna change. It's at most like an extra column in an Excel sheet for us, maybe. But it's really important to keep that in mind, that PTO policies that meet or exceed do not have to change at all, ever.
Sue?
Earlier you mentioned, you thought this might be on the ballot last year, but the county wouldn't let you. And I'm curious, that was a presidential election year, right? So there would have been a lot more people coming out to vote. So is that why they did it? Is they wanted it to be an off year?
They didn't give that reason. I think we've all had speculation. There was definitely politics at play. Unfortunately, they ultimately voted to keep us off the ballot, and it was former County Commissioner De La Cruz and the current commissioners Wayne Johnson and Lonnie Talbert. They were the ones who voted. Debbie O'Malley voted in our favor, and Maggie Hart-Stebbins wasn't present at the meeting.
Wow. How do you feel about that? How do you go into city council all the time and go positive, knowing all the forces are against you? It's hard. I mean, when you fight the fight, it's grassroots social justice activism right here.
I think we get frustrated. I'm not gonna lie. We get extremely frustrated. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you know exactly how I feel. That's my personal Facebook, not a reflection of my organization or our funders or donors.
We love.
We love. No, I mean, that's my personal Facebook. So, but it's heartbreaking and disappointing, and we've cried, and stress eat Doritos and jelly beans and whatever. But ultimately, I think it's our coalition and our community's will to keep going. And it's like when you can't go anymore, but there's someone next to you saying, "Come on, we gotta go. We have to keep going." That's what keeps us going. And I'll let you answer how you feel about that. You want to share your feelings on that?
Good.
Tim does not. But really it is having allies who are on your side, who are brilliant, who are going to fight and fight and fight for you, whether it's on the legal front or, going out, knocking on doors, making phone calls. We've been making thousands of phone calls every night, and we have amazing, it's all volunteer. Our phone bank is 100. So if you want to volunteer for our phone bank,
Yes,
please
give us that information.
please do.
This has been very helpful.
Yes.
Great. And definitely, point people to our Facebook page, Healthy Workforce ABQ.
And this is good too.
That misconceptions, clarity, fact sheet is on our Facebook page.
Hold on.
And we have lots of memes that folks can share. We have a commercial that folks can share. So if you go to the Facebook page, there's lots of information that you can actually share onto your own social media. Word of mouth is extremely, extremely helpful.
This video will get out too.
And this video will get out.
This video will go out. Can you give us your numbers or?
Sure.
Yeah.
The number to Olay is 505-796-6544. If you're interested in volunteering, you can call during our business hours between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. If you would, you can also send a message on Facebook via Healthy Workforce ABQ. We also have a website, healthyworkforceabq.org.
And where are you located?
Olay is located.
Aren't you near the Quaker House?
We are next to the Friends Meeting House. We're at 4th and Belma. So if you'd like to volunteer for our phone bank, we'll be phone banking again Thursday night and also on Sunday afternoon, Monday evening, and all day on election day.
So here's a personal question. God willing, October 3rd comes, and this passes. What's the first thing you're going to do?
Take a sick day.
I knew you were going to say that. My girl Andrea. What about you two?
I don't know.
know if I've thought that far in the future.
You haven't had that privilege of thinking that far?
Not there
Afford
yet.
yourself that privilege, it's okay. Once in a while, you guys deserve it, God bless you. This is a phenomenal mission, and I have a feeling it's gonna pass. With your hard work, Albuquerque, please, 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 go out and vote. You will not see change in Albuquerque unless you take yourself seriously and take your vote seriously. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank y'all for
everyone.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
How was that?
Very helpful.
I think